All right, welcome to episode 2 of Strength and Conditioning for Runners. Today we're going to look at the single leg deadlift, which is quite a common exercise utilised in strength programs specifically for runners. It's a great exercise for developing what we call the posterior chain, so the hamstrings, the glutes, the lower back. All right, and especially the glutes and hamstrings, they're very sort of important muscles for running gaits. The glutes specifically help stabilise the pelvis. Hamstrings are really good at propelling us forwards as that leg goes behind us into that extension. So we obviously want some decent strength in those muscles to allow us to absorb those impact forces and obviously become more efficient at running. However, single leg deadlifts, especially on one leg, as the name suggests, also challenges your balance and stability. So some people tend to butcher the exercise a little bit because they lack that confidence or they lack that stability around the foot and ankle, which is what I want to discuss today, looking at some variations that we can make it a little bit easier on balance and stability, so you're still actually getting the hamstring and glute work you need to, and also then looking at ways that we can progress it in terms of adding external load. Now, before we go into those movements, what I want to just quickly talk about is the actual pattern of the deadlift. So even though we're not using a barbell, we're not doing what's called the conventional deadlift or the sumo deadlift where we're picking up a weight from the floor and standing up with it, we still want to use the same movement pattern, which is called the hip hinge. So for this exercise, what we're looking at doing is loading up the hamstrings and the glutes by driving the hips backwards, and then obviously driving them forwards to then get into that extension and using those glutes to drive through and building that strength. So one way we can just kind of get used to that hip hinge movement and loading up the hamstrings is just utilising a wall. So we can set up just in front of a wall, feet underneath the hips, and then like I said, we're looking at that hip hinge movement. So imagine your hips are a hinge. What you're trying to do to begin with is close that hinge as the hips go back towards the wall. So we're going to soften the knees, we're going to push the hips back, and we're going to try and touch that wall and then stand back up. Super simple. Key is, as we do that though, all the movement is coming from the hips going backwards, not just from me dropping my chest and shoulders and doing this. So you can see the difference now. I'm flexing through my lower back. My back isn't straight, so therefore I'm going to put more emphasis on the lower back muscles than I need to. All right. So we really want to focus as we drive the hips back. We keep the shoulders back at the same time, and as you can see now, I've got a nice flat back, and I'm loading up those hamstrings and glutes. And again, unless you're super mobile in the hamstrings, you will feel them come under tension as you drive the hips back. So that's a little cue to yourself to say, yeah, I'm doing the hip hinge correctly. If you're not necessarily getting any sensation here, I'd argue that either you're just dropping your chest and shoulders too much and not pushing the hips far enough back, or like I said, you're potentially quite flexible through the hamstrings and you won't feel that pull in the first place. But if you're unsure, easy thing to do is film yourself and have a look at your back position. If it's relatively straight and flat, you're on the right track. If it's starting to flex, especially around the lower back area, again, we need to make sure we keep that posture as we go into that hip hinge. So that's the first piece. So keep that in the back of your mind when it comes to performing any variation of a deadlift, whether that's on 2 feet or on one leg. Once we've done that and we're happy with the hip hinge, then we can start looking at progressing through onto that single leg deadlift, okay? Now, before we go onto one leg, we're going to look at two-footed, okay? So we're going to introduce what's called the Romanian deadlift. So this is, again, a great exercise for that same muscle group, same hip hinge utilization, but now we're just staying on 2 feet, so we don't have to worry about balance and we can really focus on engaging through the glutes and the hamstrings. We can utilize dumbbells, kettlebells for this exercise. So all I'm going to do is a couple of dumbbells here. All right, and all we're going to focus on is that hip hinge movement. So again, if you need to, you can use the wall for reference, just like we did before. So I'm going to have the dumbbells by my sides. I'm going to soften the knees, and I'm going to push the hips back as I slide the dumbbells past my knees, hold for a second, stand back up. So again, you'll see I'm doing that same hip hinge movement, keeping the legs relatively straight, so there's only a slight bend in the legs as I push the hips back to the wall. So that's your Romanian deadlift, and obviously we can load that up quite heavy because it's a simple pattern. We can push the weights on that, and obviously trying to build up some maximal strength in the Romanian deadlift is a great way to start, then branching out onto the single leg variant and also supporting your running. So don't be afraid to go heavy on those exercises if your equipment allows. And again, we can progress to a barbell, hold it out at the front of the thighs, same exact movement though, softening the knees, sliding the bar down the thighs to just below the kneecaps, making sure we keep that back straight. Now, key thing to look out on that one is how far we lower ourselves down. All right, yes, we want to go below the knees, but we don't want to lower ourselves down at the expense of starting to flex through our lower back. So we don't want to be doing this and then trying to touch the objects to the floor, where we then start to round through that lower back. So the key thing to look out for is once the hips stop moving backwards, that's the end of the exercise. If that means you only go to here or you go to here, that's absolutely fine. Play within your current range of motion and your mobility around the hamstrings and the hips. As that becomes stronger and more mobile, you'll find you'll be able to get lower while still sending those hips backwards. So that's the two-footed version. So build yourself up on that, get some confidence, training the glutes and the hamstrings before then you even worry about going on to a single leg variant. Obviously we want to introduce that into our training because running is a single leg sport. Obviously we go from one foot to the other repeatedly. So we want to look at some single leg variants to obviously then make it a little bit more specific to running itself. Now again, before we start really testing that stability of the foot and ankle, we can go to what's called an abducted Romanian deadlift, okay? So that's simply where we're gonna support one leg out to the side whilst then engaging in that hip hinge movement. So for that exercise, you need a step, a bench, something like your sofa. You're gonna stick that leg out to the side, which I'll show you in a second, and then go into that hip hinge movement. So we can start with body weight. I've just got a bench, so I'll just bring this over. So all we're going to do is set up so that you're far enough away from your bench or object so that as you place your foot on it, your leg is nice and straight, all right, and the foot is pointing forwards. From there, just like we practiced against the wall, imagine now I'm trying to soften the knee and push the hips back behind me towards this wall, all right? And again, like I said, we can start with body weight, so soft knee, push the hips back. Remember, keeping that posture, that back straight, and then drive through, squeeze the glutes. So you'll get the added bonus of having a little bit of stability from the bench, but also then you'll get a little bit of a stretch through the adductor or the inside of the thigh, which again will be quite beneficial for a lot of runners, especially males, and just driving through. We can then load that up by incorporating the dumbbells into the exercise. So we're just going to hold one between the legs, one on the outside of the thigh. Again, soft knees, push the hips back, drive through, squeeze the glute of that standing leg. Again, just going just below the kneecaps. So what we'll do is I'll quickly show you that from the side now. Again, I won't bother with the dumbbells, but just so you can see the hip hinge movement. Softening those knees, pushing them back. Again, make sure that back stays nice and straight. Driving through, just like we did when we took the leg to the floor. So that's your abducted Romanian deadlift. All right, again, don't be afraid to load it up once you're confident with the exercise. So that obviously, again, we can still build some strength, but now focus on one leg at a time so we can minimize those imbalances between left and right. All right, so once you've got confident with that, you've built a bit of strength on both sides, utilizing that movement, then obviously we can progress on to the single leg deadlift, which is the kind of classic move we always see. So in terms of that movement, what I'll do is I'll just quickly go through what it should look like. So when we set up, we want obviously the foot planted firmly onto the floor and making sure we've got good alignment in the foot. So what I mean by that is we don't want the heel coming in or pushed out. We want it all in a nice straight line. From there, just like we talked about with the other deadlift variations, we want to make sure we soften the knee on the standing leg, i.e. the one that's going to stay on the floor. From there, we're then going to hinge the hips back. But as we do that, we're going to allow the leg to push out away from our body. Imagine I'm trying to touch it to this wall over here. So I'm not lifting the leg up, I'm trying to push it away from my body, which will naturally tip me forward. But again, just like all the other variations, it comes from the hips and not just me dropping my chest and shoulders. So this is what it should look like. Soft knee, leg behind to start with, push it behind, as that helps us naturally tip forwards, looking to get to about parallel. So again, nice straight back, hips relatively square to the floor so you feel it in the glutes, and then drive through. One more time. And that's it. You don't need to try and touch the floor with your hands because like we talked about, again, if you go too low, you just start flexing through the lower back. You don't need to lift the legs super high, just trying to get it parallel to the floor, okay? So again, if you look at the difference now as I try and just drop my chest and shoulders to the floor, all right, now you can see I'm just starting to round through my back a little bit, and also I won't be pushing my hips back as far, which means then we're not going to load up the hamstrings at all. We're just going to make it more of a hip and quad exercise. So by pushing that foot away from your body and elongating through the body, that will force the weight towards the midfoot and heel, therefore getting those hamstrings and glutes working a lot more. Okay. Now, obviously, as I said, that's quite a challenge on balance and stability. So one of the ways we can just start to introduce a bit of an easier variation is using the wall for support. All right. You're still going to be loading up those muscles. You're still going to be on single leg. You're just giving yourself a little bit of support until you get used to holding that balanced position. So we can literally just have fingertip grip on the wall, soft knee, same movement, just to give us that little bit of support as we go into that exercise. And again, still feeling it in the hamstrings and glutes. That's still doing all the work to return us back to the start position and getting that hip extension. But we're giving ourselves, like I said, that little bit of support on the wall. It can be a wall, it can be a post, just as long as you're keeping a light grip on it, so you're not using it to pull yourself back to the start, then you'll still get the benefit of the exercise whilst just giving you a bit of support. And then obviously once we're confident with that, we can then take away that support and go to the variation that I showed you earlier. So again, make sure we carry out those points of performance, getting the foot aligned, focusing on pushing the leg back behind us as we gently tip through the hips, not through the chest. And then obviously we can load it up. So the last piece then in terms of progressing it is add some weight. So again, dumbbells or kettlebells is probably the best place to start to begin with. We can use 2 dumbbells, so we're kind of getting an even challenge between resisting rotation and also working on foot and ankle stability. Or we can just use 1 dumbbell to kind of overemphasize one of those elements. So tends to be that a lot of people are quite confident in when they're sitting on one leg in putting all the weight into the outside of their foot, i.e. not really utilizing their big toe. Okay, so straight away when it comes to run mechanics, you're missing out on some efficient running technique and also some good ankle and foot stability by not utilizing the big toe as much. So what we can do is hold the dumbbell in the same side as the standing leg. That's going to pull us into the outside of the foot, so our foot's going to have to work hard by pushing into the big toe to balance that out so we don't fall over. So then you're working all the flexors and extensors in the arch of the foot, getting that big toe working to keep that balance, and obviously building that stability whilst carrying out the deadlift variation. So that looks like this. So I'm going to stand on my left leg, therefore dumbbells in the left hand, like I said, it's going to pull me that way, pushing me into the outside of my foot, so I'm going to have to work hard to make sure I grip the floor with the big toe and get the inside of the foot working. Same movement, soften that knee, push the hips back, nice and smooth, and then drive back through. Like I said, you wouldn't bend your leg on the way back, it's just obviously I've got that bench behind me. So one more time, soft knee, push the leg back, gently tip forwards, and obviously working that foot and ankle stability whilst engaging through the glutes and the hamstrings. So that's one option. The other option is obviously holding it in the opposite hand to that standing leg. So now that's going to try and pull us into rotation and also kind of help resist using those internal external obliques. So if you want a little bit more of a core stability focus, anti-rotation focus, then hold that dumbbell in the opposite hand. Also, if you do find that actually you tend to be more pronated, i.e. when you're standing on one leg, you tend to find most of the weight shifts to the inside of the foot and you don't really sort of put the pinky toe or the little toe down onto the floor, then also this is a good way to fight that, just like we talked about in the other variation. So by having it in the opposite hand, it's going to pull us into the inside of our foot. So we're going to have to work to make sure that little toe is staying on the ground. So again, we get that equal balance across the foot. So that's going to look like this. So now, standing leg, still the left side, same movement, just the dumbbell in the other hand. So soften that knee, push the leg back, let the dumbbell just hang in front. Again, engaging that foot and driving through. One more time, soft knee, push the leg back. Keep those hips square as best we can and stand back up. So there's 2 options that you can utilize. Like I said, if you want to just focus on lifting heavier and getting kind of both of those challenges, then just hold 2 dumbbells. So it's the same movement, 2 dumbbells, 1 in each hand, exactly same exercise. Obviously we can also use barbells in the same way, holding it out to the front as we go into that RDL. And again, that allows us to then add a little bit more load as well.